I think Shane MacGowan was a pretty big deal, and if you want to know why, I'll tell you. Back in the early 80s, Shane MacGowan started this band called the Pogues, and the Pogues was the first true Celtic punk band. So he's the granddaddy of Celtic punk. Why is that interesting? Well, I think it's interesting because through the Pogues, Shane MacGowan presents this kind of philosophy for modern people to get a whole new understanding on national identity and tradition. MacGowan was actually born in England, but his parents were immigrants from Ireland. He grows up in London, and during his teenage years, he just so happens to be part of the punk rock movement. That's kind of a famous picture of MacGowan at a very early Clash gig. I'm pretty sure there's a clip of him in the Filth and the Fury, the Sex Pistols documentary. And by the end of the 70s, he's singing in a punk band called the Nips. But things really take off for MacGowan in the early 80s when he creates this band called the Pogues. He assembles this group of young British punk musicians and starts, one, writing original tunes for them, and he's going to sing, and two, writing arrangements, like cover versions of Irish folk songs. And at first, nobody really gets it. People think that he's kind of poking fun at Irish folk music, kind of in the way that Me First and the Gimme Gimmes was poking fun at 60s pop songs. If you're going to San Francisco. But eventually people get it. It's not a parody. He's not poking fun at those folk songs. He is generating a completely new sound, and it's a sound that we nowadays call Celtic punk. But really think about what it must have been like to be a young Shane MacGowan. What is his native music? He is completely native to London. He is completely native, grew up around punk rock. But he's also completely native to Irish traditional music and folk music. Okay, how he resolved that conflict is the thing that I think is so important and so interesting. Because here's the secret. I don't think he saw it as a conflict. So think about it this way. Think about the way that Shane MacGowan's grandfather experienced music back in Ireland back in the 1920s. There's no such thing as a jukebox yet. The radio is not playing music all day, and it's not loud enough for you to hear it in a bar anyway. Irish people were going down to the pub, the public house, right? And kind of famously now at this point, entertaining each other, putting on a show for each other. You would have gone to the bar, to the pub, to a party to go hear that music. You'd be with the people in your community, drinking, singing along, belting out at the top of your lungs, dancing. It's a big, cathartic, kind of rebellious, defiant way of experiencing music. Now, think about how Shane experienced music in the 1970s with his punk buddies. They go down to the bar. They get drunk. They have a big, raucous, fun time. They're singing along at the top of their lungs to the songs. The musicians on the stage are friends of theirs. Guys, it's the exact same thing. See, we in America, when we hear the word tradition, we imagine what our ancestors were like way back in the 1700s, and then we cosplay as them and try to act like them. But in my heart of hearts, I really do think that Shane MacGowan, his philosophy was that tradition was not the things that used to be going on. It was the things that were still going on and will keep going on for forever. Irishness was not something happening in a distant, mythical, non-historical past. It was something that was happening right the fuck now still. It wasn't a fusion of Celtic music and punk music. It was just Celtic music. Natural, organic, raw, uncut Celtic music, but pronounced with a punk rock accent. Now this last bit is a little kooky, so I'm not going to try to convince you to make this connection in your mind. I'm just going to confess that this connection exists in my mind. Shane MacGowan was a hip, modern man of his time who also at the same time was able to embody this really old national and ethnic identity of Irishness. The Pogues is a template. It's a demonstration of the fact that you can be authentic without having to be outdated. You can root your national, religious, ethnic identity in today as opposed to in the distant past and still have it be meaningful. Whatever kooky philosophy MacGowan had that made something like the Pogues possible is something that I think this world just desperately needs. And that's why I think Shane MacGowan was a really big deal. So first off, thank you for the comment. Thank you for leaving comments. Most people don't. But I am going to say that I strongly disagree with this particular comment, or at least the way this one is phrased. This comment was left on a video I had made talking about Shane MacGowan and kind of where, in my mind, he sits kind of in the map of music history. This commenter says of MacGowan that he created a bridge between tradition and modern, and that's fine if that's how he sits in your mind. I'm just saying that he does not sit there in my mind. It's kind of the opposite. MacGowan, to me, proves that there is no gap between the tradition and the modern. A lot of people use the word tradition to point to the things that used to be, and I think of MacGowan as instead using tradition to point to the things that always are, that continuously are. Sure, aesthetics change, instrumentation changes, but through the Pogues I learned that that doesn't have to be your definition of tradition. You can instead define tradition as the unchanging cultural, social, emotional function of the music.